Welcome back, traveller. We resume our story in a small, dark chamber inhabited by 3 kobolds, a gnome who is clearly the worse for wear, and the bones of several unfortunates who ended their days sealed in this chamber, manacled to the walls. Here, in the Goblin Stockade, deep within the Sunless Citadel, Erki agreed to join us on our journey deeper into the Citadel, whilst the 3 newly freed kobolds returned to their colony. Erki had no weapons or armour, so we kitted him out as best we could. He declined the offer of a rat to eat, but he was able to heal himself with the aid of his god, Pelor. We then ventured to the door north of us, and I tried to see if it was locked. It didn't seem to be, or to be trapped, so Tethlis delicately opened it with his foot. Unfortunately, he didn't aim his kick quite right and stubbed his toe on the doorframe. It remained steadfastly closed. Gergus, shaking his head, walked up to the door and opened it the traditional way, by the handle. The door swung open to a large room, seemingly empty, but from which a rustling noise could be heard. Elrohir, who was not enjoying himself at a Eurovision party, snuck his way inside to take a closer look. I followed, and as he was failing to see much in the room, I cast Mage Hand. The smell was making my eyes water, and I ended up poking Elrohir rather than any of the boxes and crates that Gergus assured us were in here. Throwing a cheeky wink to Tethlis, since he was going in first, Korac strode into the room, weapon drawn. Suddenly, we heard a couple of thumps and a volley of arrows came for the 3 of us in the room. Thankfully, I was not hit, but Korac and Elrohir were less fortunate, taking 5 points of damage each. 2 goblins emerged from the darkness and Tethlis ran in, taking a swipe at the first goblin, but it ducked the blow. Korac, with a grim smile, walked up casually to the other goblin, raising his axe and with a mighty backswing, grinning at Tethlis to show him how it's done, cleaved him in twain. Gergus came up behind Tethlis, attempting to peek over his shoulder, not an easy thing for a 4'8" dwarf and a wood elf, and unleashed a blast of sacred flame from his hands. The goblin was able to dodge, but some boxes got well and truly torched. The angry goblin made a swipe at Tethlis, his black curved blade barely scratching the surface of the wood elf's chainmail. I remained coughing in the corner. The goblin bolted, Korac making an ineffectual swing at him. Elrohir ran to the door that the goblin exited through, bow ready to take a shot. The door opened to reveal a long corridor filled with pillars. Elrohir shot at the fleeing goblin, his arrow bouncing off the stone. Unable to get within attack range of anything, I decided to have a rifle through the boxes and crates. I managed to pry the lid from one, plunging my hand into a substance not unlike the pink custard so many of us remember from school dinners. The goblin having, for the moment, disappeared, I wandered about the room, putting pink handprints on everything and finding absolutely nothing. At this point, I changed out my dice after 2 natural ones in a row. The columns in the room ahead were decorated with ornately carved dragons, intertwining their way to the high ceiling. Sconces burned on the walls, casting an ominous, flickering light. Several more doors opened from this hallway, and Tethlis, running ahead, determined not to let the goblin escape, sensed more movement. Possibly goblins, possibly just the shadows dancing around the edges of the torchlight. Ignoring this, Tethlis drew a hand axe, with a shout of, "Guys, I think there might be a couple more goblins in here. Korac, get in here!" He rolled a critical hit, dispatching the goblin with a flick of his wrist, embedding the axe in what passes for a goblin brain. Hearing his name, Korac raced in, but the sneaky goblins managed to keep out of his sight. Korac readied his axe, biding his time until something came within hitting distance. Gergus followed the other two into the room, also unable to make out any lurking enemies. He cast Thaumaturgy, making the sconces flare as his free hand briefly emitted a faint golden glow. This caused enough light to reveal a goblin skittering across the hall. Elrohir managed to swiftly shoot, the arrow thudding deeply into the goblin's face, killing it instantly. And meanwhile, I spent the time looting the goblin corpses, finding 8 silver pieces which, as ever, I shared amongst the group. I find people tend to be friendlier when you share. In the ensuing silence, Tethlis was able to hear some goblin noises. I asked Erky and Meepo, who had been hanging back during the skirmish, if either of them could speak goblin. Erky could, so I suggested he go to Tethlis to see whether they could discern if the goblins were talking about the new D&D movie or what they wanted to do with our innards. Korac was done with waiting. With his blood oath to kill goblins pumping through his veins, he splintered the door with ease. This revealed a room with a campfire and 7 goblins, 2 of them casters. Unable to rage nail the door shut, he had no choice but to stand there as an arrow hit him for 4 more points of damage. Now badly wounded, this was all he needed to fly into a full-on rage. Seeing this, Gergus moved up to Korac, casting Cure Wounds on him, restoring 7 points of health through his glowing hand, laying it on Korac's ankle. I ran further into the room but couldn't cover enough distance to really get close to anything. I tried to shoot at a goblin, but the columns prevented me from getting a clear shot, and I missed. Tethlis used his fighting expertise to charge in, flanking the goblin I had just missed, and took a swipe, but again it dodged. Tethlis took another strike, and a voice from the heavens boomed, "Let me hear those dice clack, you sexy bitch." But sadly, Tethlis missed again. Korac took his turn and obliterated the pesky bugger, embedding his great axe in his head and dangling the body of the dead goblin over Tethlis like a human taunting a cat with a toy. Barely taking a second to shake the corpse from his axe, Korac charged headlong into the goblin camp. Gergus fired off another blast of sacred energy, his eyes glimmering bronze as his hand began to glow, sending a flame towards the goblin, which managed to dive out of the way. This gave Elrohir the chance to take an attack of opportunity, which he did in style, killing it mid-run. Another goblin caster popped out of the gaps in the wall, electricity arcing between her hands. She pressed a hand against Tethlis, sending a shock of electricity through his body, stunning him and draining 6 points of life. The only target in a room with 3 goblins, Korac found himself attacked from all sides. A blade inflicted some damage, an arrow missing, and another globule of green energy from the caster which, once again, he dodged. The archer and the shaman took the opportunity to vanish. Elrohir made his way to his friend in the chamber and made a strike against the single goblin still engaged with Korac, but he missed. I made my way into the room, ready to cast Thunderwave and save us all. My plan sundered by the fact that there was only 1 goblin and 2 of my friends within range. Instead, I loaded my crossbow, ready for anything to come within sight. Tethlis joined us in the room, which was quickly becoming very crowded, ready to save Korac from the vicious little bastard intent on stabbing him, but missing. Korac, refusing to let Tethlis beat him, smashed the goblin into the next world with gusto, like a champion slugger. And here is where, for now, we leave our tale. My friends and I, along with our 2 companions from within the citadel, in an area infested with goblins. No chance of respite. We know there are more coming. The friendly rivalry between Korac and Tethlis as to who can get the most kills and do the most damage is still ongoing, but for now, Korac has the lead.